ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons. Hey, this is Arlene and you're listening to Durian ASEAN today. At our third segment of our ASEAN Breakfast Call, we have two guests. He is Dr. Hwok and also Dr. Muhammed Abdul Khalid. Both of them did a research on inequality in this country, Malaysia, and would like to share their findings. Hwok is a senior lecturer of Department of Development Studies of University of Malaya, while Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, he is an independent researcher. So welcome to our studio.
Pleased to be here. Thanks.
Pleased to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So before we start our conversation on your findings about inequality, I would like to ask you, what is the definition of inequality?
Defining inequality? Well, inequality, is a certain condition where some people have more and some people have less. It has different dimensions like income or wages or wealth. And if you're asking about how it's measured, there's also various ways that it can be measured. But we're not getting into any complexity about the issue of inequality. It's just this condition where there's rich and there's poor, right?
So in the global context, the topic of inequality is not something foreign. It is something that has been brought up over and over again among activists, politicians, economists, and all that. But in the global context, when it comes to inequality, there's still a very much strong debate between different forces whether is it going up or is it going down. Because when it comes to the global measurement of inequality, definitely a lot of poorer countries are catching up. They are getting much more richer. But at the same time, there's this discussion that in terms of within the country itself, the intra-inequality between society is getting wider. So in the context of Malaysia, based on the research that you did, perhaps you can share with us how did you measure inequality in this country, and what prompted you to want to know more about why inequality is happening?
Okay, maybe I'll answer that. In Malaysia, we always measure inequality in terms of income inequality, specifically household income, which means we look at the differences in income between between households, and that households usually have 4.3 members. In Malaysia also we look at, and the data allow us to look at inequality between states, between region, between ethnicity. If you take from Merdeka, for instance, 1957 until now, there's two phases of inequality. In fact, three phases. From Merdeka to 1974, in fact, inequality has been going up. 74 to 1990s, inequality has been coming down.
This is based on Gini coefficient?
Based on Gini coefficient. From 1990 to now is almost at the same level. Latest number, it shows that it decreased slightly.
What is the number, the minimum number of Gini coefficient to show that the country is not is somehow equal, not
okay,
not that, not otherwise?
Gini usually you can have between 0 to 1. 1 meaning that one person just went everything. 0 and that everybody is equal. Of course, that's not how it works in the real world. Most equal society in Nordic countries is between 0.2 until 0.3. That's the number that you want. In Malaysia, latest number based on press statement by a minister in the Prime Minister Department, 2014, our number is 0.42. Slight decrease from 2012, which was 0.44. Some say this is still high, but to me personally, it's not the absolute number. It's the trend. We should always
measure the trend.
Measure the trend. You want to see that it is going down.
So you are measuring several decades of trends.
The number allow us, yes.
Well, we are focusing on the more recent trend of the last decade or so. I'm glad that you brought up the international context, because this is one of the impetus for the study. It is a very important issue, especially since the global financial crisis, and there's increasing awareness. Even the IMF it's become, they're mainstreaming the issue of inequality suddenly. Well, although many of us have been talking about the problems of inequality for a long time.
I think Thomas Piketty made inequality a popular subject.
Thomas Piketty, yes, was part of a growing trend, though. I mean, I think it had already become more established. I mean, before that, if you're talking about like the more mainstream figures, Joseph Stiglitz was already highlighting it. But
the price of inequality.
Thomas Piketty launched it again even further. If we look at some of the trends in the middle income countries, and you look at Asia as well, Latin America stands out in the last 15 years for inequality, reduction, but there's a story that tallies there, in that you had this wave of election of left-leaning government, and they introduced policies that were favoring the bottom or lower income masses, and then you see inequality has in the official estimates has declined. So it fits together, the observation as well as your causal explanations. But Malaysia, so as Muhammad has said just now, has registered this in decline in the last decade, specifically from Gini of 0.46 in 2002 till 0.44 in 2007, and then 0.43 2012, and now 0.42. So it's an unmistakable trend of declining inequality. But there isn't really anything that we can observe about what happened in policy and in the economy that gels with this estimation of declining inequality. And nobody is talking about the inequalities being declined, and public perception and the popular discourse is talking about inequality having increased, or at least staying persistently high.
Bill Gates, in response in his review with the book by Thomas Piketty, he actually said inequality is on the decline, unfortunately.
Inequality is, and there's so many facets. He may have been thinking, I think what you said just now, where you have many countries having faster growth, and this could be also because the higher income countries are now in the doldrums, and they are Europe growing slowly. So if you have countries that are growing faster at the lower or middle, then you could see inequality declining in a global scale. But within countries, right, there's a mix of pictures, and within Asian countries, the Asian Development Bank 2012, their annual report the annual policy report, right, were focused on inequality, and they pointed out that all the major economies in Asia, China, India, Indonesia, South Korea, they had registered increasing inequality in the last decade. Malaysia is counter to that trend. Together with Thailand, so not the only one. But so again, it seems to be it's raising these questions. Is it true that inequality has declined? But we are not. These are the official figures, which is based on Household Income Survey, which is an authoritative source. It is sampled with 40 to 50,000 households around Malaysia. So it's not something that we can dismiss simplistically, but it's this puzzle still. Why is everybody feeling that inequality is rising, but the official data shows inequality has declined?
One of the objectives of Thomas Piketty writing the book Capital in the 21st Century is to prove that certain hypotheses about inequality based on numbers and facts. So how do you present your numbers and statistics with the current perception people have about inequality?
Usually when at the individual level, when you think the cost of living is going up, your wage is not going up, you see some people are getting richer, driving bigger cars, you thought inequality is increasing. What the most government statistics department measure, many countries, they look at household level. So while household number is coming down at income level, maybe at individual level it's going up. public tends to, like I said earlier, they tend to look at cost of living as an indicator of inequality, and also they look at wage, which is different than household income. They look at financial asset. They look at housing, property asset. So it's, what the number is showing is not basically what individual is looking at. What the government is presenting is two different things, and we tend to mix this together. But doesn't mean that the public is wrong. Actually, public is also correct. Like our studies.
So I'm correct if I say
Yes,
there's a rise in
exactly.
inequality because I feel the pinch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, a perception is a perception, right? It doesn't mean that it's not founded in anything that is empirical or factual. It's your experience and some real things that you are observing. But of course, it's it's individually and maybe as a group you can start to feel that you agree with each other, but still it's not the whole picture of what's happening in the country. So we strive to to try and to look for data that will have a substantial breadth of coverage and is able to shed some light on what is happening in terms of distribution.
Mm-hmm. The Pew Research Center shared a very interesting perceptions of inequality in Malaysia. They said that Malaysia are one of the least troubled with inequality. They are among the least concerned about it as a problem, the least likely to think it is growing, and one of the least likely to say that the economy system is unfair, which is interesting because if you see the current trend in government's budget, it has focusing a lot on the area of BRIM. So do you agree with the Pew Research Center?
It depends on which year the survey is taken. If much earlier, and this confirmed, people read in newspaper crime, and the Pew research shows that the utmost concern of Malaysians is crime. Now we seldom hear crime. We keep talking about inequality. When you ask people, what's your most concern? It's going to be inequality, and I think it's reflected in the statements, like you said earlier in the budget, that inequality is an issue, and they want to address this. What are the measures that being taken? BRIM, for instance. BRIM is not to reduce inequality. The objective BRIM is to as a measure to reduce a temporary measure to reduce the impact of higher cost of living. We calculated in one of the projects that we've been doing with Dr. Lee and Tan Sri Kamal. We measure the impact of BRIM. Just a small change to inequality, better impact or more effective instrument to reduce inequalities, minimum wage, which we implemented. I think that we can see a slight decrease in inequality because of that. BRIM, I don't think so.
I see. You have anything?
No, I mean, you were referring to a specific study. It was done in 2013. I have the notes here with me. So I don't know the full number in the sample, but it was global, but it's Malaysia, when that conclusion that was written about Malaysia being least troubled with inequality is it's Malaysia relative to that sample, and some of the countries that featured in European countries, you can see that where the economy is struggling. And I think people are also disenchanted and angry about the situation. It really fuels their perceptions. The country that people regarded inequality as a problem, most of all, or one of the highest, was Greece. So for all their troubles, it fuels people's perception. It's not necessarily that Greece's level of inequality, if actually objectively measure it, is highest, but certainly the people's feeling towards inequality. And you can imagine that, with a lot of people struggling, and then they're facing budget cuts, and then they see the rich are still living very comfortably, while inequality, they get quite inflamed about the problem. But still, 41% of the Malaysians in that survey consider inequality a very big problem, and 34% a moderately big problem. So it's still there, and but I think it's well, I mean, that survey is better than just one person's perception, and I think it's useful to refer to, because it is quite true that that we have that in the comparative sense, Malaysia's level of inequality is probably not as bad.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean that it's not a problem, but you could certainly think of places where the problem is worse.
Mhm. Let's focus on your research, which is interesting because very few attempts in Malaysia among academians to actually talk about inequality and do specific research on this rather than talking. Trying to understand inequality through just mere theories or certain Western ideology about what inequality is all about. But this is based on Malaysian data. But I'm sure you have some disclaimer about the limitation of your findings. Maybe you want to share about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when we look at in our research, we look at private sector wage, we look at public sector wage, we look at financial asset, specifically unit trust, we look at housing, and we look at car sales. First of all, the data are not comparable. So you cannot say that. How do I say this? There's a limitation in data because we cannot measure top 1% of each asset classes because the data do not allow us to do that. Second, we exclude.
So are you saying that like properties of those who are owners of companies, it's hard for you, big major MNC companies, it's hard for you to measure their...
Yes, for housing particularly, we do not know that this first-time purchase or second-time purchase is a group purchase, or individual purchase. Is it for speculation or for staying? We do not know. So that's one limitation. And we also do not take into account that there's a limitation that we are fully aware. Some people also invest in other things. They're not only in unit trust, maybe they invest in stocks. So in wealth ownership, it could be other instruments.
Mm-hmm.
As in, with the same person owning a house and holding shares and having unit trusts, right? So we look at them all separately.
Mm-hmm.
Housing inequality is one, and one snapshot, and unit trust. We have a few snapshots of unit trust, but there certainly can be people who own a house and unit trust, but we're not able to sum them up to identify who are and the level of inequality of all assets combined.
And we do not also have we do not calculate net wealth. We do not have a debt level. So even though you
what is a net wealth?
I mean your asset minus your liability.
Oh, okay.
In other countries, they measure this. We do not have this number. Because let's say for financial asset in ASB, for instance, maybe it's a borrowed money. We do not have that number.
I see. So based on your data, what are the different categories that you divided in terms of trying to understand different understanding of inequality in this country?
Okay, well, to just reiterate, the government, the official data reports household gross income. That means by household, and all the income that could be from multiple income earners. So a few people working and earning income, as well as different income sources. Can be wages, can be self-employment income, it can be rental income. All of it is lumped together, and on that basis, and transfers as well, and private transfers between from family as well as public transfers. So there's so much, and it's not disaggregated, unfortunately. So we're not able to say what is it, what's the trend in terms of personal earnings, person by person. We have two broad categories: earnings and wealth, and they're all at the individual personal level, meaning inequality between persons, not inequality between households. And for earnings, we take as our indicators of earnings inequality EPF accounts, because it derives from basic wage. Everyone is paying the same rate of contribution and earning the same rate of dividends. And we have the car ownership, because you buy cars from out of salary or to get a loan, you need to show proof of that. And people don't buy speculatively. It's not for accumulation, right? So it's mostly for need, for usage. So we have passenger car sales. And also we have public sector employment, not so much the wage level.
How do you measure public sector employment?
It's quite it's very basic. Just the share of the total public sector at different levels, at top management, at middle management, professional, and I can just mention it. What we find is that the share that's at the very top is increasing. So obviously at the top, they're also earning higher, income, the wages and the allowances. Top management in 1999 was 0.09% of the public sector. In 2012, it was 0.17%. So it's a very slight increase, but I think the trend is towards some concentration at the top. Yeah, so we infer these things from very limited data.
Mm-hmm. You have something to it? So I'm quite curious to know, like, based on all these different categories of data you have, has inequality decreased since 2000?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll talk about the earnings. Our indicators of earnings. Well, so we are able to compute the Gini coefficient. That's what we were talking about, and that's the one that is the main reference in the government official data. Also to note, because I think our data sources are quite urban centric, but the official statistics for urban areas, that is the Gini coefficient within Malaysia's urban areas, also shows a declining trend. Mm-hmm. So we're still addressing the same question: why is it this declining trend? But nobody is talking about it. Even the government is not talking about.
Oh, really?
This very much. Only recently, only like the last 2 or 3 years, where
they hit from
general, when inequality in general is a policy priority. But the years in which we see this trajectory of declining inequality, it really just was something that was overlooked, and it wasn't a real target. There were not actually policies in place to address inequality in a systemic way.
It's more like brim here, brim there.
So I think we overlooked it because we were not really really targeting that. And therefore, the things that you really target, like poverty rate, they are very, very diligent to track it, to report, and then to celebrate the success when you find, but not with this until recently.
But I'm quite curious, like, why it is reducing and nobody actually
aware
of it.
I think we can get to that, but we are finding that there are indications that it's increasing. The EPF, we show.
So different categories have different indication.
Yeah. It's and some of them we can compute the Gini coefficient because we have the wage. The data is reported. So in EPF, we see in the savings two main things. One is that there is some concentration at the top. So the share of the top 10%, the top 1% in total EPF savings is increasing. And that seems to be the thing driving rising inequality in EPF savings, which we associate with earnings inequality. The other thing from the EPF we can see is that the gap between young workers and those who are a bit older, and the categories we have are 15 to 20, or 16 to 25, 25 to 35, so this kind of 10-year brackets. So the 16 to 25 young workers, their wage growth is much lower than the other categories based on the EPF data. So public sector, as I said, there's indications of this concentration at the top with faster growth of positions in management, in top management, and slower growth in other positions. And passenger car sales, the share of sales annually that are in the expensive car, luxury cars, above 100,000 or above 500,000 in constant prices, that has increased. So these are reflections of rising earnings inequality.
There's also inequality in our paper. We measure inequality in wealth, particularly in financial asset, which we use unit trust as an indicator. in unit trust, we select ASB as that's the biggest, about 50% of all the unit trusts.
So the limitation is you can only measure the Bumiputra's.
No, we also have Bumiputra because that's the largest and the data is available. We also look at the top 8 biggest unit trust funds in the country. And what we measure, if you think in the past 1 decade, inequality in financial asset, particularly unit trust, is almost double than inequality in household income. The Gini is about 0.8. If you look at this, that's for ASB. If you look at the 8 unit trusts, we also find all 8 unit trusts has higher Gini than household number. And those unit trusts that has longer, that's been set up slightly longer, would have higher inequality. Maybe because then many people can invest the first time, but it needs financial asset to continue, need good earnings to continue investing. That's why you see the longer maturity funds would have higher inequality. On house price, on property asset, also we see, although the inequality is slightly lower than financial asset, we see also the growing trend of inequality in financial asset. And this also again confirm what people are talking, confirm what the number is showing, that house price is getting more expensive, and the availability of houses for those who have deep pockets, and this reflected in our findings. Yeah.
Interesting. What was your initial hypothesis and how does it compare to your findings?
We want to answer a question. Why the public perception is that inequality is going up but the household number is coming down. Maybe then we should look at the individual earnings. Maybe we should look at the asset ownership. Maybe that would answer why public perception thinks inequality is going up. So that's the question that we try to answer.
Yeah, I think the perception is often driven by people's what is visible and more conspicuous. So I think people look at they're driving the car that they're driving, and then they see these other luxury cars racing around, and that is they're okay. I'm left behind. These other people are doing fine, or housing, right? Or they're struggling with buying homes, and then they see luxury condos and bungalows shooting up. So I think on those very specific, those two in particular, I think, which are conspicuous, I was expecting that we would find increasing inequality, and that's that, and we do obtain what we were expecting. In wage, what's been happening seems to tally with rising inequality, because you have this persistent very dependence on low skill, low wage migrant workers. So you have this wage depressing effect at the bottom ends, and then you see but in other, especially the higher reaches, wage growth seems to be doing fine. So that were based on that, we were expecting as well that wage inequality would see a rising trend recently.
Has government policy such as trade liberalization affect inequality?
If you look at cases of other countries, let's say you take the example of Vietnam and America. For certain segment of population, if you liberalize, for instance, fishery in Vietnam and America, they say no more tariff for catfish. So Vietnam can produce can export more because it's cheaper to produce. But then when there's changes in this agreement, which means American can produce it much cheaper, it would impact the fishermen in Vietnam. So you can see the income goes down. The same when we talk about TPPA, we do not know the details. This is based on news report. If you liberalize, let's say, agriculture, if other country can produce products at much cheaper rate than us, then we have a problem. Then the income of those affected will be reduced, and then you can expect everything is equal, maybe inequality would increase.
We will take a short break. When we return, more discussion on inequality.
ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hey, this This is Arlene, and we are back again with discussion on inequality in Malaysia with Dr. Hwok and of course with Muhammed Abdul Khalid. So we discuss a range of topic, and we also talk about your data and of course about inequality as in general. But let's focus on government's policy. As we all know, the current budget 2015, one of the key agenda, besides the BRIM, which we discussed earlier, is GST. What is the implication of GST when it comes to inequality?
Well, if you're talking about GST, then it's a matter of how prices are going to be affected. So then it's a question about those who earn. It's basically how far your income is going to get
because
you.
You said that personal earnings, individual personal earnings are on the decline. So with GST, would that be impacting
inequality? No, the data is showing that earnings inequality is already increasing. Yeah, so. In GST, it would be it's you could say effective earnings, because it's about how much you can actually spend when there's changes in prices, we're getting all kinds of different messaging about this, and then the list of exemptions and so on, which I have to say I'm not completely keeping up with. But when it comes to consumption,
like 900 items,
I know.
Probably nobody memorize it.
Every person can probably pick, I like this, I don't like that, I buy more of this, I buy more of that. So really, a lot of it is contingent. But just in general, right, lower income spend a higher proportion of their income on consumption. So these kind of taxes are considered regressive, because the lower the wage, the higher you effectively pay as a proportion of your income.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I see it's regressive. Because the poor consume more, now you have to tax more. That's where the exemption matters. And the impact of GST to these prices. Usually, you don't see the increase in price after GST. You will see 1 or 2 quarters before GST, because then you can get away with it. If you're a seller, you're a producer, you can get away with it. After that, it's more difficult because everything can be traced. That's why it's also important that you have to have temporary measures to address this. And what the government has been doing is to give BRIM, which is to me to address temporary measures for the increased cost of living is correct. But then I think we must also consider what's the exit strategy. Do we continue giving, or we stop, or do we make it targeted? This has to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. What about subsidy cuts? Because those from the bottom percentile of income level, they might not be able to spend more, and they need subsidies. So would subsidy cuts by the government, especially on fuel, would somehow widening the impact of inequality in this country?
When we measure inequality, we usually measure at income level. We don't look at expenditure level. We don't look at net basis. Would it impact inequality cut of subsidy? If it means for financial asset or for housing, it means you have less resources to invest. You have less resources to set aside for investment purposes. Then I think it would impact inequality. Does it impact low income household? If you're very poor, you don't have a car, you don't have a motorcycle, you don't enjoy subsidy. There's no subsidy for bicycles, right? So if you decrease subsidy, in a way I think is fair, but you need to assist the bottom household through a targeted transfer. And in Malaysia, we always talk about subsidy and fuel subsidy. There's also subsidy for corporates, tax allowances, tax credit tax cut, we seldom talk about this because this is not direct impact to government fiscal accounts. Maybe when we talk, the public, when we talk about it, we should also talk about this, the subsidies for the corporates, indirect subsidies. Yeah.
When it comes to subsidy for the corporate, Malaysia actually have one of the highest in Southeast Asia.
I'm not sure because I haven't come across any number.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with the data, but there's we know that there's a lot of fuel as well and tax breaks and all that. I mean, what is available though, it's not necessarily always always approved or always applied for. Yeah.
So what's the way forward in this? I mean, you presented your data, you somehow get the kind of hypotheses and answers that you want. But what's the way forward? Are we moving towards reducing inequality? Any measures, any recommendations? Or are we moving towards a direction where we have to face the reality that inequality exists and nothing that we can do about it?
The first thing that you need better data. In our paper, we say maybe the household income survey might need to be retweaked, need to be adjusted a bit. And during the seminar, I think I remember saying that maybe we need at that level, the leverage, so we can look at the net basis. If you have good data, then maybe many things you can be done. You can play with it and look which policy works. If you want to reduce inequality, first you need to know why inequality goes up. Is it education? Is it labor market structure? Is it
and different countries have different variables for this.
Of course. So when we talk about Malaysia, then we need to know, is it tax? Yeah, tax seems to be pro capital. So when you have pro capital, PKT also say the same thing. Pro capital, and then the very rich who can accumulate, you widen inequality. Education access is really the key in reducing inequality. The government has spent a lot, actually, one of the highest even compared to OECD countries in per capita basis to education. This key instrument in reducing inequality is are we using the correct instrument when we talk about education? Do we focus on primary education, better quality access, better teachers, or we look at tertiary education? So first we need to, like I said, we need to look at why inequality goes up and what the instrument we can use to reduce this.
But so far you don't have any like hard data on why, to answer the question why that you presented just now.
Yeah, we just have observation of what the level is, but we don't have any other, data. Like we know what is the distribution in the EPF, but we don't know what is the background, education background, the age, occupation even, and this data is contained in. Labour Force Survey also has been collecting wage data in the last few years. But still, the Household Income Survey is the most authoritative and rich data source, and that can be mined for labour market analysis as well. So not just looking beyond the household. And some of these trends could be because of changes in household structure. So you could have, let's say, if working, young adult living with their parents, so they're working and they're earning, their earnings would be counted towards the gross household income, but the earnings of a young working adult living with parents is not a reflection of how much the household actually has at its disposal. I mean, maybe they'll give a few hundred to the parents, but the young working adult would be spending a lot of it privately, and he's his own basically head of or determining how that income gets.
But it's also
allocated.
The changing structure of the family. Perhaps in the past it used to be just one parent earning for the rest of the family. Nowadays could be everyone, the kids and also the parents. So that one has to be analysed further perhaps in the future. But just trying to understand Malaysia economy in the next 5 to 10 years based on the trends that you see right now on the data, what do you foresee in the future?
It Depends actually. It depends on what goes into 11 mission plan. That will give us indicator where inequality move forward. We have are we targeting more towards low income household, so the income goes up, then therefore you can maybe reduce inequality. And also it also depends on commodity prices, for instance. When you look, when commodity prices goes up, rural income usually goes up, and you see everything's equal, inequality has come down. So many variables in play that we do not know. I think for me personally, I would wait for 11 Malaysian plan before I make any judgment.
Okay, so next year.
I mean, we're also looking
second time.
We're also curious about the minimum wage, what impact it has. Whether or not it is actually what's the compliance with it. One impact it may raise those who were previously, well, obviously if you are complying and previously paid below minimum wage, then they would see a boost. But what can also happen is that you have a concentration at that level. So if you're looking at the whole spectrum of income levels, the whole distribution, then you might see some kind of compression close to the minimum wage, which means it's not necessarily going to be reducing inequality, or the effect may be a little bit more moderate. But we don't know. What we do know so far is that there hasn't been too adverse impact on unemployment, right? Which means one of two things: that the labor market, is robust, or there's not really, or compliance is sketchy. It's uncertain because you can if you're not complying and continuing to hire below minimum wage, then you don't need to fire your workers, right? So we also that's another thing to look out for. But I think a lot of action will be in the labor market, and there's and on that front, the bargaining is still there's not much change in terms of shifting more bargaining power towards workers. So it's there's not much to give confidence that the labor market wage inequality is going to decline.
Mm-hmm. So that's based on your role now to understand it further. That's all for our show today. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our show. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.